Hi everyone. Welcome again to the Discovery Lab series. We're here with Jackie Rand today, and I'll just introduce you to Jackie a little bit. But hi Jackie, how are you going?
Hi Sandra, great to be here.
Thank you for coming. I'm just going to introduce you a little bit, but then would like to have you actually introduce yourself on a much deeper level. But Jackie is an emeritus professor who is a registered specialist in small animal internal medicine and heads the Australian Pet Welfare Foundation, who is dedicated to saving pets' lives through research, education, and advocacy. I will probably not go too further into this because I would like Jackie to talk about how she came to do what she does and what her research background is, because I tell you what, it's fascinating.
Thanks, Sandra. Well, I graduated way back in '75 as a veterinarian from Melbourne University and worked in private practice for 8 years and then headed off overseas because I was keen not to just spend my whole life talking about fleas and flea control in small animal practice. So I wanted to do a specialty. I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do medicine or surgery, but I ended up with medicine because I like the stimulation and the thinking part of it. So then I worked in Switzerland. So I spent 4.5 years in Canada doing a residency and a doctorate in internal medicine, small animal internal medicine, then spent 3 years in Switzerland before coming back to Australia and had intended to set up the first specialty practice in Australia, but got headhunted to go to University of Queensland. So I spent 25 years there, and I'm most known in other circles for my work in diabetes and obesity in pets, and particularly in feline diabetes. But I was then asked to teach urban animal management at UQ, and it was to the students in their 5th year. So they'd learnt for 4.5 years how to diagnose and treat disease. And I was talking to them about how being homeless for a dog or cat meant that more of them die than any disease that they had just learned about in their last 4.5 years. And in fact, most of the dogs and cats that were euthanized were actually young and healthy. And for some of the students, that was really shocking. And what it also made me realise that we really didn't have any good understanding of the problem. And unless you've got an understanding of the problem, you can't solve it. And having spent my career at that stage in asking the question, cats that have type 2 diabetes for the same people that get the reasons people get it, they're couch potatoes. And I can actually show you my couch potato cat sitting behind me. They too much energy, don't move much, and also there's obviously a genetic predisposition like humans. And we ask questions like in human medicine, is there a better way of managing them? Because most diabetic cats at that stage needed insulin twice a day for the rest of their lives. They only lived on average about 17 months after diagnosis. Admittedly, they were older cats. So we asked the question, how come if they're type 2 diabetics, can't we treat them a different way? Isn't there a better way of treating them? And we designed a project to test 3 different ways of treating them, and found that using a long-acting insulin, a very low carbohydrate diet, and tight glycemic control, only 10% of them needed insulin for the rest of their life. And we could get most of them off insulin within 4 to 6 weeks. And that research went around the world in 4 years and changed how cats are managed. And the protocol we developed at UQ with the postgraduate student, Rhett Marshall, is still the most common protocol being used. No one's looked at the incidence of diabetes in urban stray cats. What we've worked with is pet cats, and pet cats many people now confine them inside, and the risk factors for diabetes are inside confinement, less active cats, demanding greedy eaters. So the cat, if for all those cat owners out there who has a cat that their internal clock tells them an hour before dinner time that they should be fed and they're starving, those demanding greedy eaters and gulp their food down quickly, they're at risk of diabetes. So all of those, and we feed them, particularly dry food is very high density, and we know with both animal studies and human studies, if you eat your food quickly, very quickly before the body has time to register that you've eaten and those satiety hormones to increase, you actually eat more food. And so with the dry food, they can consume a lot of energy because they're only about 10% water compared to, say, canned food or, if they were catching food, which has got a much higher water content. So they eat a lot of food quickly before their satiety hormones increase to say, hey, you've eaten enough, stop. So it's all those factors, but it's lack of exercise, high energy food, and it's sort of a genetic predisposition. And we know that domestic cats are predisposed, Burmese in Australia, and that Australasian European strain, not the American strain. But because stray cats are outside, they're not eating often as high energy food. They're sometimes, they're often cheaper food, so they don't have as much fat or protein in them or carbohydrate. So although we've never looked at the incidence in stray cats, I would say it would be significantly lower because they're just more active. So I brought that concept of asking a question, well, how come all these animals are dying? Why, what is the problem? We don't even understand. Like with cats, we knew they were type 2 diabetics, or many of them were. But we don't know with cats, are they stray cats or they own cats? So we had a PhD student and she analysed the data from 191,000 cats coming into RSPCAs across Australia. And it was clear that many of them were stray cats. And yet, a lot of the community engagement that local governments put out and welfare agencies were all targeted to owned cats. And yet, people who, and we did further research to ask people who are bringing stray cats into the shelter about those, and people were saying for stray cats, the reason they brought them to the shelter was it was not my cat, I care for the cat, and I think it would be better off in a shelter. And back then when we analysed the data from 2006 to 2010, the euthanasia rates were much higher than they are now. And they were well over 50%, up into the 60, 70% for some sites. And when we asked about owned cats, they said, it was couldn't find housing. 36% of people surrendering an adult cat couldn't find housing that would take a pet. So that was clearly an issue that needed to be solved, and it hasn't yet been solved. Some states are working towards it, but I hear Victoria's now postponed implementation of that new legislation until next year because of COVID, which is disappointing. Which mean, the legislation says that you can't deny someone with a pet without a really good reason. You can't discriminate against them. But so we started to understand that. So the next PhD student asked people about these cats that were coming in, and many of the people bringing in a stray cat had been actually feeding it for more than a month. So they were attached to it. So then it opened up strategies. And so that's really how, it was always asking, well, what is the problem and how can we solve it? So once we knew that a lot of them were stray cats, about half of them were kittens, people had an attachment to them, and at the same time research was coming out of North America showing that targeted desexing works. And a lot of the data, when you look at the data, it's very, where the cats come from, very much in those suburbs where they're disadvantaged, low socioeconomic suburbs. So I'll stop talking, and perhaps maybe you want to ask more questions, because I can talk all day.
I really found it fascinating. In your research, I've been reading some of it, and it talks about sort of colony of cats. How do cats that are not owned but are outside roaming, stray cats, I understand that they make specific colonies, and that's how the population of these cats are sort of balanced. Is that how cats interact in the wild around humans?
Well, what I'd like to make a differentiation is between truly feral cats, and those cats get no support from humans for food or shelter, and they reproduce independently of humans, and they hunt to maintain all their energy needs. Whereas what we're talking about are urban stray cats. And the more work we do, the more we find that virtually all of those urban stray cats are being fed by people. And so depending on the area that you live in and the population you survey, between 3 and 9% of the adult population in Australia feeds one or more cats daily they don't perceive they own. Mm. They feed an average of 1.5 cats, so they're usually feeding between 1 and 2 cats. And it's very localised again to those disadvantaged areas. And when you dig deeper, some of those suburbs have 20 to 30% of the community classed as low income. And for some classifications, low income is a household on less than $500 a week. So that's 2 adults and 2 children on less than $500 a week. And so you can imagine that if a friend said, look, hey, we've got, some kittens, and the kids say, yeah, can we please have a kitten? And the Facebook, or they say, yeah, and I don't want to take them to the pound because they'll be killed, which may or may not be true. So they take a cat, and the kids love it, and they can afford to feed it, and they can afford to buy it a bed and a bowl and maybe a toy. But to spend $350 maybe, and then there's the microchipping costs, and if the local government requires registration or the state requires registration, there's those costs. So that's just unaffordable. Mm. So the cat, by the time it's 6 months of age, it can have kittens, and they haven't got the money, and oops, there's a litter, and so those get given away, but some of them wander. So we do know that that's the root of the problem. And so there's a lot of stray cats. Now, there will be in some cases where there's a food source, where people are where there's a lot of food and a lot of cats around, it will attract more cats into a colony. And so less common is someone who's feeding, say, 8 to 10 cats. And we know the average colony size is around 11, 12 cats, 10 to 12 cats. But they're much less common. And then you've got the occasion, and they're, those people, there may also be a squalor, some mental health challenges, and they just need help. And if you can get, they want the best for the cats, they're not hoarders, but they've got overwhelmed. And if you can help them with free desexing and transport of the cats and a little bit of healthcare and advice, they want to do the best thing for the cats. And they'll often become very responsible after that if you can just help them over that hurdle of all these cats breeding and lots more kittens and, fighting and neighbour complaints. Then you've got the occasional one on public land, which may be around a shopping centre, maybe at a tip refuge site. They're less common, but again, it's a food source that attracts them. But banning people feeding them just doesn't work. And you can't, because you can't ban compassion. And when you calculate that, in a city of 100,000 people, when you've got 3 out of every 10 feeding a cat, that's what 3,000 cats that are being fed, at least, and it's actually 1.5 cats, so it's probably 4,500 cats. That's a hell of a lot of cats, and you simply don't have enough police officers and compliance officers to stop those 3,000 people feeding cats. And then if you try and do that, then they try and do it surreptitiously, because they'll actually go to jail rather than stop helping those cats. So that's not effective, and cats will find, they're very resourceful, so they'll go somewhere else and meow on someone else's door, or they'll hunt, which is what we don't want them to do either. So there's a lot of issues here, but if you come at it from an area of understanding, then it's really solvable.
Yes, it certainly sounds from some of the research that you have presented. So do people understand where the problem is? Like, I guess we're talking about the problem, but do people understand like how deep the problem is? And there are so many varied opinions as to cats specifically because of the hunting.
Yeah.
What are some of so you talked about the different people that are more likely to create the problem because of financial pressures or people not being able to hold on to the cat anymore. These cats end up on the street, and then there's humanity wants to look after these cats because they ask for food, and these cats are not feral, so they're still very much human liking. They will want to be around humans, and there's that bond that we share, and so people want to feed them. Does feeding them actually reduce the pressure much on the animals actually gaining their own food by hunting?
We do know that a cat that has to hunt to maintain all its energy needs does hunt, and there's some published data around that, does hunt more. But we do know also that cats that have all their energy needs met will hunt, and it's the thrill of the adrenaline surge of the predation, the chase, and dogs do the same. But they don't tend to, on average, if there's only some cats that hunt, and there are some cats that are, the Ivan Milats of the cat world that will just kill and kill even though they've got sufficient food, but they're pretty rare. And we've done some research where we've asked people what they see their dog and cat catch, and cats overwhelmingly catch mice and small lizards, and then rats, and then common birds. And dogs tend to catch the bigger, they'll catch rats as well, but the lizards they catch tend to be the bigger lizards, the blue-tongued skinks and some of the water, the nice water dragons, and the bigger, the possums. So cats don't as commonly catch possums, whereas dogs much more commonly catch possums. Feeding a cat does certainly reduce its predation needs. It doesn't eliminate predation, but it's very dependent on the individual cat, whether they hunt or not, and whether it's the occasional mouse or they're one of the cats that catches quite a lot of birds. But they're not common, those cats that really catch a lot, that are getting all their nutritional needs met by people.
So would you recommend that the fact that people do feed stray cats it's not a bad thing? Would you say that's something that shouldn't be condemned and rather supported, or what's your take on that?
What should happen is best practice. And so it's controlling reproduction, stopping reproduction because cats reproduce so quickly, but it's also controlling food. So not putting ad libitum food out and the bowl always full, feeding measured amounts. So it's eaten, cats, if you keep them at their ideal body weight, they actually eat their food quite quickly. And you don't want leftover food to attract other cats and other animals like rats and mice either, because around the suburbs in I think virtually all capital cities in Australia, rats are quite a significant problem. So it's about that responsible feeding, not feeding in public places, providing some shelter for the cats, again, hidden. So it's about, I think everyone, the wildlife people and the cat people want fewer free-roaming cats and certainly less kittens being born. And what a lot of people don't realise is that where there's uncontrolled reproduction of stray cats, there's two consequences of that. One, 75% of the kittens that are free living that are born don't live to make even 6 months of age. They die from various things, accident, disease. But the other aspect is many of them come into shelters and pounds, and we've calculated based on the data we've collected that across Australia, the euthanasia rate for dogs coming into shelters and pounds is about 8 to 10%. For cats, it's about 50%. So many shelters are doing better than that, but quite a lot of, particularly council pounds, are not. And so some of the issues are, the trauma, and many of those are pre-weaned kittens that come in. On average, about half of what's coming into shelters and pounds are kittens. And you can imagine if you got a job in a shelter because you loved animals and a box load of kittens arrive that are 4 weeks, 3 weeks old, they're really cute, but the shelter just doesn't have resources because that's the 6th box of kittens that arrived today, and the staff are told to take them down to the euthanasia room and someone has to kill them. And, I have a picture that I show, and I don't know, whether that's appropriate here, of a kitten being killed. But they don't just lie there, because this is what people don't realise is there's a hidden toll.
Something that people don't really realise, like what happens when we don't take responsibility, for the animals that we take in, and all these animals then suffer. And people that, as later we'll talk about, the people that have to do their euthanization as well, the euthanasia, really suffer as well, which, there's just so much to it.
Yes. So this is a typical pre-weaned kitten, and it's been killed by an injection into the heart, and they don't just lie there. They mew and they squirm, and it's an uncomfortable volume. The injection's going in, and they're either killed by an injection into the heart or an abdomen of excessive amounts of barbiturate. And you can imagine that if you're working in a shelter and you're asked to kill a litter of 6 of these, and then the mother, perhaps because the mother's very timid, and you've got too many nice cats to try and adopt, and during the spring, summer, this might be, this might be the 3rd or the 6th box of kittens that comes in. And so we estimate between 80 and 115,000 cats every year are killed in Australia. Half are kittens, most are stray, and on average across Australia it's about 10% of dogs, but 50% of cats are euthanized that come in. And so that's a pretty devastating statistic. And so you can well imagine, everyone wants fewer cats in cities and pounds, in cities. There's the fighting issue, there's the peeing, too many kittens being born, wildlife predation, and the cost. And the question is, what do we do about it? So it's about knowing the size of your problem. It's about understanding the problem. But, it's costly for shelters to take in animals. A cat costs between $500 and $1,000 to take it in and try and rehome it. But there's that human cost. And we do know from research that many people exposed to that killing of healthy animals end up with post-traumatic stress, and it increases the risk of suicide. And in fact, the suicide rate now in North America in that sector has reached, is equal top along with other emergency responders like police and firemen. So that's a pretty devastating statistic that says something about the impact of killing animals on people. And so we need to do something about it. And what's been shown is stopping reproduction by desexing them, by sterilising them, because you simply can't kill enough to for them to to be effective. So it shows that you have to kill a similar number to the number that you have to desex. But in fact, the numbers that you have to desex is achievable because humane societies will come in and help, and animal health companies will come in and help. Whereas if councils want to just manage cats by killing, they have to pay for all of it, and it's a very expensive exercise, and the community just won't support that level of killing.
And it costs the government a lot of money. I read somewhere in your documentation there that to reduce the population significantly for 10 years at 2-point-something million a year. That's a huge cost over 10 years, or even in a year, for the government to spend on just culling creatures that are completely healthy. It sounds terrible. Is that the statistics there?
What we do know is that you need to kill or desex between 30 and 50% of the population every 6 months to be effective. So we've got a project where we're working on desexing 60 cats so this is 60 cats per 1,000 residents, and we know that that's achievable. We do know so that's in a city of 200,000. We're planning to desex about 6,000 cats. But for the city to kill that in the first year is not, that's not going to be acceptable to the community. And the cost of trapping those cats is enormous.
Yeah. And so why hasn't this been considered before? I understand that in other countries that has been an effective thing, like in the US. Why hasn't this been considered as to the efficacy of actually neutering and releasing cats?
So the issue with this is under Australian legislation, it's not legal in any state that we're aware of under various different parts of legislation. And so that's the challenge.
Is that what you're saying? That it's actually illegal to catch a cat, sterilize it and put it back in the urban area? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so you're putting it back to its home where it's living anyway. It's not like we're creating more cats, we're not moving them. They're there, they've got a home territory where they're getting food, and we may or may not know who the people are who are feeding the cat. The best programs, you have a community liaison officer working in the community to in fact identify those people, and then you sort of educate them about best practice. But it's not just releasing them anywhere. But there's various legislation. So in Queensland, all cats that are not owned are considered restricted matter, and it's illegal to feed them, to move them, to give them away. People may not realise that in Queensland, particularly in Brisbane, people have been prosecuted for finding homes for kittens, stray kittens, because under the legislation they're restricted matter and they can't be moved, given away or sold or fed. In other states, some states recognise 3 classes of cats. So there's the owned cat, the urban stray, and the truly feral cat, and that's the most advantageous in terms of allowing different methods to be used for managing them. But in those states, it's often considered abandonment, and that's I don't think it would stand up in a court of law because you're putting them back to their territory. But that's what's always brought up. And other states have rules that they have to be confined on a property, which makes it difficult for some of those people that are feeding a cat that that some of them will take ownership of them, but they can't confine them, and they might be feeding 10 cats, and they can't afford a permit for multiple cats. So there are different issues in different states, but generally across Australia it's illegal.
Wow. And yet statistically, or even just like the research that has been, my understanding is that it's an extremely effective method. Are there some numbers you can share with us as to the effectiveness of this method?
Yes. So, well, let me just show you. So the question is, I think everyone, the wildlife people, cat people, and a lot of cat people really like wildlife too. The question is, what do we do about? Everyone would agree that fewer free roaming cats would be better. So, in fact, we can keep doing what we're doing, which is where we accept strays that are found by the public. Councils typically provide traps to people who are complaining about cats. And what we've estimated is that we're killing about 2 to 5% of the urban stray cat population every year. And that creates a vacuum that's rapidly filled by other cats. And in fact, because you're taking out cats, you tend to get better survival of those kittens, many of which will die. And in fact, some other research in Australia that's shown that just removing 30% a year, not 30% every 6 months, can actually increase cat numbers by 2 to 3 times. So effectively, we're doing what a farmer would do, which is harvesting juveniles and leaving enough breeding stock to make sure we've got a harvest of juveniles next year. And I think, everyone's heard, that this is insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. It really isn't, we're doing sustainable farming of cats. And this is some data from Victoria, which shows, this is combined lost dogs home and RSPCA data, that over a 7-year period where they took in 157,000 cats, they killed 74,000 of them. It really made very little impact. This is just under 22,000, just over 23,000. Very little impact after killing all those cats on intake. And this is New South Wales data over a 7-year period. Took in 173,000 cats, killed 107,000. Did it make any difference to intake? No. So it really doesn't work. And you can go for high intensity culling. We know it works, but you have to kill 30 to 50% of the population every 6 months and keep going for at least 10 years to get a sustainable decrease. And so in a city of 5 million, you'd have to kill about 100,000 cats in the first year. That would cost something of the $25 to $50 million at $250 to $500 a cat. You'd have to build shelters because you have to hold them for the minimum holding period. And there's simply not budget or community support for that level of killing. We've talked about feeding bans. There's just not enough people to police it, and there's never been a city where that's shown to be successful in reducing cats, because you simply can't ban compassion. These people will go to jail. And I know there's people in Brisbane that have been given suspended jail sentences now for feeding stray cats. But we do know that desexing, it has to be high intensity, has to be targeted to locations of the highest cat impounds, does work, and that's including all cats that are not desexed. Owned, semi-owned, which is what we call these cats that are fed by people who don't perceive they own them. And we call that a community cat program. And it is a sustainable solution that's supported by the community. The important thing is that it needs to be targeted. And this is a slide from Brian Cortis of Neighbourhood Cats in America, and he's one of the partner organisations who's working with us. And this shows that if you've got 100 cats and you've only got enough money for 20 spay neuters and you've got 4 postcodes, do you just offer, say, free desexing for across all of those 4 postcodes and just have a shotgun approach? And what's been shown is that these cats that are not desexed can easily overcome the loss of reproductive capacity of the one that is, and that's partly through increased kitten survival. And there's a lot of pressure from immigration also. Or you can do the whole colony, which is better, but you have to really manage those colonies well. And as soon as a new cat comes in, capture it, desex it, and either if it's highly, it's very socialised, find a home for it. If it's not, to put it back there after it's desexed, because a pregnant female, you can have 10 cats, and after the cat's had a litter, 6 months later, you've got 16 cats. They grow rapidly. But the best thing is to pick a postcode where you've got enough money to get really high intensity desexing done. And once you've got that area under control, just maintaining it with still offering free or highly discounted desexing, and then move to the next. And so this is an area, this is one of the very first papers that showed it worked. And this is Gainesville, Florida, and they took one postcode that had a high cat intake, and they desexed it just over 2,000 cats over 2 years, and they adopted social cats and the kittens. And that was about 60 cats per 1,000 residents, and they estimated that was over half the unowned cat population. And there was some background community level, what we call trap, neuter and return, just that shotgun approach of about 8 cats. And this is the target area, and you can see the level of spay neuters that they suddenly increased, and you can see how quickly the shelter intake reduced and how quickly euthanasia decreased. And here, similarly, this is the non-target area, and intake was 3.5 times higher in the control area, where there was this low-grade background of sort of a shotgun approach, and euthanasia was 17.5 times higher, just 2 years after this high-intensity desexing. And there's lots of data now showing it works. This was another one where the Pound made a partnership with the Humane Society, and they desexed 580 cats in a population just under 20,000. And the reason they started it was because intake was increasing, euthanasia was increasing, it was damaging their staff, they had staff losses, and we know that the staff turnover rate's higher where you've got high euthanasia rates. And they started this desexing about 30 cats per 1,000 residents, and you can see how quickly, just in a year, intake decreased and euthanasia decreased. So it's really effective, and there's lots of now evidence. This is the latest paper in 3 municipal shelters. They were the sole shelter for a city of just under 200,000 to just under 2 million. Desexed a lot of cats, but welfare agencies will step in and help pay for them. They returned 83% to where they were captured, and over a 3-year period, intake decreased by 32% and euthanasia by 83%. So we know it's effective. The issue in Australia is that it's illegal to do this.
Wow. So if a person owns a cat and if we use this method, and then people have cats that they own and then they let them roam and they're not desexed, is this something we should be also considering in this equation? Something that people should consider when having cats not desexed at home, and when they let them out to be, in the neighbourhood with the other cats?
Every cat needs to be desexed unless the intention is for it to be a breeding cat. And the research shows that their behaviour's better, their health is better. So it just makes sense, and they're better to live around. You know, you have a spraying cat, a fighting cat, or a cat on heat. But so where there's cat issues, and as I say, they're the disadvantaged areas, you just need to go in with understanding that people have compassion. They want to do the best for them, but they simply don't have the money. And, you know, you can come from, well, if you can't afford a cat, you shouldn't have it. But there's cats there, and, you know, everyone in, you know, many people in their life have a cat and their circumstances have changed, or a pet, and they've lost their job. And so does that mean you shouldn't have it? Does it mean you love it any less and you want to care for it? And so, at what point should you not have a pet? Is it when you don't have $500 of disposable income saved up for healthcare costs, or is it $1,000? Is it $5,000? And does that mean then that only children of wealthy families should have the experience of the love of an animal and you know, caring for it? So there's all these other questions that I think as a community we need to answer if we want to be judgmental. But if we just go and accept that these people do care for them, they actually do want to do the best. And research data from North America is actually quite compelling. And I'll just see if I can quickly find that, because what they've shown is that when they go into communities, so what they found in North America was that, so if the household income was more than 35,000 US, then 80% or more dogs and cats were desexed. But under 35,000 US, 60% were desexed. But under the poverty line, which was 15,000 for an individual and 19,000 for a couple, then only 10% were desexed. But if they went in there and they offered free desexing, some community education about why it was important, because people are damaged in shelters having to euthanize all these excess animals, and many of the kittens die, and they offer help with transport, but the free desexing, they could get the desexing rates up to 90%, even in these low income areas. So it's not like people don't want their animals desexed. They do want the best for them, but they simply don't have the capacity to you know, provide desexing costs. And so we need to make sure in these low income areas where excessive cats are being bred, you know, kittens are being born, they're causing complaints, lots of costs for the community, for local government, and damaging people's lives. We just need to make sure that desexing is available, that it's affordable, accessible, that if they don't have transport, they can get the cat to get it desexed, and coupled with information on why it's important.
No, it's fantastic to have that education, and yeah, and just deal with the problem as a community, with governments together, with researchers. I just think that's the way to go for every issue we have in society. Can I also go back to this idea of colony of a cat? Because I actually was quite stunned, because I always thought cats were these solitary animals. So they form colonies. Do they obviously then interact as a sort of like, what is the colony?
It's fairly loose, and there's individual cats that will be quite dominant and they can guard the food. So again, good practice is putting multiple food bowls out that are hidden from public view, only putting enough food for that cat down, and they'll usually come and eat it quickly and then go. And you know, where there seems to be guarding and food resource issues to help those cats. But what we do know is there's a lot of movement out of those colonies and a lot of movement into the colonies. In an average colony of, say, 12 cats, a couple might disappear that year and a couple more will appear. And they often move. And we know from the data that Professor Helen Swarbrick published from the University of New South Wales, that a number of half the cats that appeared were actually socialised to people. A quarter of those had microchips in them, and the cats lived within 500 metres of the university. And so cats are opportunists, and there's some other research that shows that cats, more cats will choose companionship than food unless they're really starving. So, if the owner's away all day and you've got university students who will pat the cat and give it some food, why not spend the day down there? And hey, maybe I mightn't even go back at night because this is a better deal. So, cats are very opportunist, and and as people know who've got a cat that does go outside and they've tried to put it on a diet, the cat will quite often go around to a next door neighbour and meow. And people, feeding an animal makes you feel good, whether it's a wild bird, feeding an animal that eats the food, it's like giving a gift. And so people feed them. Cat asks for food, you give it food. And so that's, and so if you don't want a cat hanging around, you don't give it food. But you try and find who the owner is, obviously.
Yeah, just a fascinating thing to even think about, all these animals, having this life out there. And I suppose they're so probably different in how they live outside of a home. There's a few books like I've read in the past where a lady followed like a pack of dogs, and she just sort of monitored what they were doing and how they behaved and how different they were with one another compared to when they were at home with humans, So I just imagine cats have these amazing secret lives as well that probably someone's done a documentary on that, I'm sure. And it's just, I guess just coming to understand, because I understand that people have different feelings about animals based on what we choose as our choice of pet or our choice of wildlife, And I just think it's so important to think about all these individual animals as individual animals, just like us. They have their partners, they have their kittens, and it's kind of just humanizing the fact that these animals are there and we need to work with them rather than against them. And I think the fact that, and really getting to sort of, not just the community, it starts with the community, I suppose. Once our audiences understand what is happening, maybe the governments will change. Like, I don't know if this is something that we can even discuss in this scenario of what's next. How can we make this happen? How can we make it legal? And what are the next steps as to help the situation with these stray cats?
Yeah. And Sandra, it's very exciting. It took us a year, and we actually we were denied twice a restricted matter permit to undertake a community cat program, which has a component of what we call trap, neuter, return. But but most of the cats that we're going to desex, I believe, will be semi-owned cats where people are feeding them, and they will actually, based on some data from Victoria, I believe that most of them will actually take ownership of the cat and agree to have their name on the microchip database. But it took us we were denied the permit twice, and then we appealed to the Queensland Civil Administrative Tribunal, and 2 weeks under a year after we started the process, we were issued with a permit to undertake this project. And so we're very excited. We've got a number of partners, and we've also got Green Cross who are supporting the project, who have offered to complement with $500,000 of free desexing. And we've got other partners, MSD Animal Health, that are going to provide free vaccinations and flea and tick control as well, endo and ectoparasite control. And there's many other partners that are supporting it. And what we've picked, we're doing a little trial in a town in Queensland called Rosewood, and then we're hoping that the Ipswich City Council will, they haven't voted on it yet, but we do hope that they're going to support rolling this project out across the whole city. And our aim is to reduce their cat impoundments and their euthanasia and their complaints dramatically. And I think after that, it's really going to be local governments that drive it, because local governments, they get complaints about, cats wandering. And a community cat program is really quite comprehensive. It's about working with everyone. It's fair enough if you don't want a wandering cat on your property, but we can work with those people. There are repellents. You can use strategic feeding to keep a cat inside, even if you're in a rental property and your fences aren't suitable to put up cat-proof fencing, it's too expensive, and you've got a DoorDasher cat who just wants to be outside, you can still use strategic feeding so you don't feed the cat all its food until you're shutting up the door for the night. So the cat's going to be around to be fed, and then you can keep it in. So there's simple things like that. So we're going to be working with the whole community to reduce complaints, which is what drives councils to provide trap cages, and councillors get emails from the community saying you're not doing enough for cat management. So, but cat management's costly. It costs the council at least $500 to impound a cat and try and find a home for it. So I think it's going to be driven by councils that want to find different solutions. And I think once we show that it works, and putting these cats back actually decreases complaints, doesn't increase them. We're not increasing the number of cats that are there already. We're not creating more cats. We're not creating more biosecurity risk. We're actually decreasing the biosecurity risks associated with risk to human health, because we know that it's kittens, mainly cats under 1 year of age, that shed toxoplasmosis, oocysts. And so by stopping breeding, we're reducing environmental contamination. We're reducing cat fights and injury to pet cats. So, there's so many things that are positive about the program, and nothing's worse than what it is now. We're not creating more cats. So I think that it's going to be local governments that drive it, but we do need legislative change across Australia to make sure that abandonment's not, putting a cat back in its home territory. And we're not talking about, and we don't talk about trap, neuter and return or release. The actual correct term is trap, neuter and return, because you're returning it to its home location. It's like wildlife. You try and put it back where its home location is, where it's got food sources, it's got its own territory. Abandonment's taking either a stray cat and taking it some distance away, and normally we say 300 metres is that they should be returned within, that's where their territory is. So it's getting legislation changed, but supporting a comprehensive community cat program. It's not just trap, neuter and return, it's for owned cats, it's for semi-owned cats, and a big focus is helping people have a cat that they're feeding, which they may not have really perceived was their own, but asking them whether they take ownership of it and care and responsibility for this cat, and we believe most people will, based on the data we've got.
Yeah, I think so. And because if someone wants a cat, or if someone is already feeding the cats, they obviously have a relationship with that animal. So it's a very small step, between becoming a rightful owner. In terms of when you have a cat at home as a pet owner, should all cats, because of the nocturnal nature, should they actually be locked up? Like, is there a law, and should the cats be indoors at night to prevent predation and also them straying and interacting with other cats?
Look, for the welfare of the cat, it's best if it's locked up at night. We know the distance travelled is double at night. They're more likely to be in cat fights. They're more likely to be hit by a car because they're travelling twice the distance, crossing more roads. And that's the easiest to do. So just again, remember, where there's low income areas where you're in rental properties, the fences often aren't suitable to make cat proof easily. It costs generally $1,000 to $2,000 for cat proof housing. And it's fine if you've got a cat that's happy to stay inside, but if you've got a door dasher cat who just wants to be outside, at least if you can use strategic feeding. So and I do that with I've got 2 cats, the one you saw who's the couch potato, and she's predisposed to diabetes. The other one's a door dasher, and I strategically feed him. And he can't leave the property, but I still don't want him on our property outside at night because there's other cats that come in and fight. And so I feed him 1/3 of their food in the morning. I feed them 1/3 at dusk when they come in, but he will try and get out the door again, and sometimes he's successful. And I don't feed them the last third until the dogs have gone out for their pee and the dog door is closed for the night, and then I feed him and I know he's inside. And that works 99% of the time. So it doesn't work if I accidentally feed him before the dogs have gone out for their last pee, and he'll dash out the door sometimes being brown and, just he's so fast. So, there's simple things that you can do, but legislation doesn't work very well because, who's going to enforce it? It's more telling the community that for the cat's sake, just from a cat point of view, it's best if it's inside at night. It's less likely to get hit by a car, less likely to get a cat bite abscess that's going to require veterinary treatment, less likely to get feline AIDS because that's transmitted by fighting, and less likely to predate because that's when they're most active.
That's wonderful. And do things like streamers or bells and things like that, do they actually work? Because cats are so amazing at doing their thing. They're such an incredible predator. So I'm just wondering, does it all work, or is it just something that we get told and then people get fired because it's a thing,
Bells have not been shown to work, but there was a bib that was developed that you could put around the cat as a bib, and you can look it up. And that does work for those cats that are real predators. So I guess, if you've got a cat that's a real predator that just wants to be outside and, even confined on your property, but you don't want it to hunt, that's something to look into. So stopping cats predating, it is not, if you've got a cat that has got that real urge, it is difficult to stop it.
Yeah, I would assume so. I mean, that's it's what they do, And I suppose the difference is when a cat eats whatever it hunts, as opposed to hunting because it's already fed and just wants to have its nature come out, Are there any other suggestions you might have for, just anything related to how society needs to look at the cat issue and take more responsibility?
I think, there's such a dichotomy and it's so emotive in Australia. So you either really don't like cats or you like cats, and there's a lot of pushback for using population control through desexing. And I think, we just need to get runs on the board to show it works and that it benefits everyone. And we reduce complaints and reduce wandering cats. So I think watch this space. We've got quite a bit of material on our website on the Community Cat Program, and on the Australian Pet Welfare Foundation website, we've also got a tab about 9 ways to save lives. And they're about all the things that people in the community, shelters, rescues can do to help save lives. So it's simple things like training your cat to wear a collar so it's got an ID disc on it. So if it gets lost or it goes around to someone else's place, to be fed, they can call you, so they can see what the, or if it is caught, you can quickly call the people. Whereas if it only has a microchip, then it has to go to a vet or to the pound or a shelter before the person can be called. Making sure your address, your contact details are up to date, because we know that 37% of stray cats that have a microchip, or lost cats that come into the shelter, 37%, and for dogs, similar percentage, all the contact details are wrong. So that's important in being able to contact and get your cat back safely to you. And the other tip is don't wait 3 days if your cat goes missing, assuming it will turn up, because in many states, an unidentified cat can be euthanized after 3 days. And we do know that pet cats that are highly stressed many of them will behave like a feral cat. So they may be euthanized. And so if your cat goes missing, we do know that most of them are within 500 metres. So put up posters, knock doors, ask people if they can look around the neighbours, because if it's an indoor cat, there's a chance that it's within 4 or 5 houses of where it went missing. So be proactive and start looking straight away, because there's a lot of sad stories out there where people started looking too late and found out their cat had been euthanized.
Wow. Yeah, that's not a thing you want to happen to your family member. Yeah, so it's just, as you say, with everything, it's just about community outreach, understanding. And then the change will happen, I think, as people get more education on these things. And I'm so grateful that you guys are doing this, just because of the immense suffering that happens on all ends, whether you love cats, whether you hate them, it doesn't matter. The reality is that all of this, someone is going to get hurt. And of course, normally it's the cat. And I just think just understanding what we're doing and taking responsibility for our own lives and our pets and whatever else we have, I think that's just, that's where it comes down to, and it will reduce a lot of anger from the people that don't want the, creatures being hurt in the wild. And I still wonder, I know that we've discussed this a few years ago at the Compassionate Conservation Conference, just the numbers that people hear that cats hunt, especially this was, I think, feral cat related, just how the research and everything is basically compounded towards this hatred towards the animals, And I'd just like to clarify that, because I remember you saying, or maybe it was someone else said that these are not the real statistics. And I'd like to hear your voice on this.
I think it's, you have to be careful about extrapolating what feral cats catch. And we do know that in certain areas of Australia, they have been devastating, and cats are, evolved as a desert animal, and they're extremely good at catching, lizards and hopping marsupials, and particularly where the vegetation is not as dense. So in more arid areas, they are extremely effective hunters. In urban areas, we have looked at all the research, all the publications for data in urban areas of Australia, and it's actually not compelling at all. There clearly needs more research, but the few studies that have been done where they've looked at cat density and bird density and diversity, so one was passerine birds, and they found that there was no association between cat density and passerine bird diversity and density, but there was a very strong negative association with housing density, distance from bushland, and the size of that bushland. So the more houses, the fewer trees, the further from bushland, the fewer passerine birds. So they're the magpies and that sort of bird. There was another one where they looked at cat regulations, and they looked at 3 postcodes or suburbs where one had banned cats for 10 years. Another one required cats to be inside at night and wear a bell during the day. And the other one, you could do what you liked with your cat. And there was no difference in the density and diversity of the most common mammals, and they were brush-tailed possums and bandicoots. But what they did find is that in the site where you could do anything you liked with your cat, it was a little hoppy, an antechinus, and that was more common in the site where you could do anything, there was no regulations. But the vegetation was a bit denser, and they concluded that it was really density of vegetation which protected them rather than the presence or absence of cats. Another study from Victoria showed that bandicoots were more frequent in where there were sort of highly urbanised areas where there were more cats, and they were less frequent in nature reserves. I think that the data that is relevant to the effects and the extinctions that are thought to be caused by cats in our wild areas and our remote areas by feral cats, we have to be careful about extrapolating that data. And my concern is that there's been a lot of publicity, and most people are aware of the concern, but we're clear, I see the destruction of trees around where I live for, the pressure of increasing density of housing. And maybe we're going to wake up one day and say, hey, we shouldn't have been blaming the cats all the time. We've lost our vegetation. And in fact, it's vegetation and density of vegetation and the appropriate vegetation that is the issue. And we've been blaming cats all the time, and the developers have been chopping down the trees. So, I like wildlife and I like cats, and I love the birds around here. And when I look at the trees that have been chopped down, these beautiful mature gums, some over 100-year bunya pines that were just chopped down a few hundred metres from where I live, which is only about 10 kilometres from the CBD, they've been chopped down for 3 townhouses. So, and the cockatoos would come around and feed on the bunya pines. It's just devastating to see that. And yet, we're focused on cats. So I think we need to really look at what do we need to do to protect wildlife in our urban areas and in our wild areas.
I totally agree. Yes, it's definitely true, because as you're saying, the deserts suffer the most. And let's face it, desertification is increasing at a rapid rate because of the amounts of trees we're cutting down, forests, just because it makes sense that there's less rainfall, and you're just perpetuating this issue of, having less and less habitat always, no matter what, in the way that we're currently living in this situation as you described. And yes, it's easy to have a scapegoat. And I just think that there are so many reasons for things happening. There are so many different factors playing part in this situation and every other situation. And we often jump on board because, we get all uptight about things and then jump on board on something, but then realize later it's like, oh, there's so many more things to look at in this. And I think it's exactly what you're describing. We need to have a holistic picture of every issue that we face as humanity at the moment.
Yeah.
But yes, thank you so much. That was such an enlightening discussion. I really enjoyed everything about it. The statistics and numbers are really good to sort of look at, so I appreciate your contribution with your PowerPoint. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
No, and I think to the audience, you can do things too to help get change, and looking at how you can save lives and getting some tips on our website, looking at what we're doing for the Community Cat Program. We didn't get a big Australian Research Council grant that we wanted to get. And one of the reviewers said that the Australian Research Council should never, ever support a program like this. So we need community support. So if this is something that you want to be part of, a really transformational project that I believe is going to be the biggest step change in saving lives in our shelters and pounds in our generation, please get behind us. We'd love to hear from you.
That's fantastic. So this is the program where you said the restricted matter permit has been granted. Is that the project that you're particularly speaking about?
We've got information about Community Cat Program, and there's ways to contact us and donation buttons there. So if you'd like to know more, email us, and certainly helping us with support would be fantastic. So it's a Australian Community Cat Program, and there's quite a bit on our website on that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you so much for your time and for all the effort you're putting into saving these little critters' lives. It's really lovely. I think all creatures deserve to be alive. And, and I think it's just us that need to sort of sustainably have them live with us. And, well, they're already here. So thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I do hope we speak again, maybe when things change again in legislation, not just how your community project has gone, that'd be lovely to catch up in the future.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I hope in 12 months' time we'll have some exciting data for you.
Thank you. All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching again, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye. Thank you, Sandra.